Hi everyone, welcome back to Recitation 3 out of 5. Today we're going to be building a bilingual comms agent, so let's get right into it. So really the goal for today is to start to go a little bit deeper with N8N. So before we start to introduce some tools, really start to see some nodes, we're going to see a lot more nodes today. And before we've used AI agents, but the tools that we've used with them have just been the things that are already in N8N, such as Gmail, Google Sheets, Google Calendar. But generally, when you're making an AI agent, you might want to add some functionality of your own. So I'm going to teach you how to do that today, and we're going to actually build some tools of our own. We're also going to talk about incorporating human feedback. With AI agents, it's often a good idea to run it past a human, and that's kind of like the best way to do this, right? To have an AI component and a human component. It's not necessarily AI replacing a human or human instead of AI. There's a nice synergy that we are going to work on, which is called human in the loop. We'll see a little bit later on. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about how to structure workflows. In the in-person recitations, or should I say on Zoom, we had a really good conversation talking about when do we want to have multiple agents versus one, and how much should we assign to each? So we'll get into that a little bit later on. So very quickly before launching in, you might have started working on your project. You can always talk to me or Professor Martin if you want to. We also have another resource, which is Justin, who was a student last quarter, who is very willing to help you out with your projects as well. So just another resource for you if you want to reach out. So let's dive right into what our core content is going to look like today. And I'm going to introduce a new term called sub-workflows. And this is really not different than a regular workflow. I'm just using this to refer to a workflow that is being called by another workflow. And this has got really two main uses in N8N. One, if we want, we can use our agent and give it a tool that is just actually a full workflow on its own, which is great because then we can really specify what exactly we want that tool to do. And then also it gives us some form of modularity. Imagine we have a lot of workflows and they have one part that they always do, just like this one chain of nodes. Instead of just copying them over from workflow to workflow, we could instead make a single workflow that does all of those things and then call it in a bunch of different places. It's sort of like a function if you're familiar with coding, and just gives us a building block. So before we head over to N8N, let's talk very quickly about what exactly we are going to build today. So imagine you are on the marketing or communications team for a company. In this case, I'm going to introduce a fake company that I'm going to call Evanston Pathways that we'll use throughout this. Imagine it as an education, a bilingual education company. And so that could be ed tech, but it can also be community events. So think about all of the different aspects of what communications could look like. And we're going to say specifically that we are in charge of writing both social media posts, we can specify the format later, and also press releases going to news outlets. And what we really want to do is we have a lot of ideas coming from many different members of the organization or the company about what exactly we should post on our social media, what exactly we should be telling news outlets about what we are doing, and it can be very overwhelming to get a first draft and really iterate on it. So we want to use this as an opportunity to scale up our production. But kind of importantly, we don't want just AI to write everything. You've seen a lot of AI slop on Instagram and other social media where it's very clearly AI written. That's not what we want. We want this to match our brand voice. So imagine someone on our team has an idea about a post that they want. We are going to have them fill out some sort of form, which we'll specify later, which will be sent to an AI agent. Now, before what we've done is we've given information directly to an AI agent, and then it has kind of done everything for us. It's figured out exactly how to do it, and we're going to utilize a slightly different structure today, which I'm going to call hierarchical agents. And the idea behind this is that it's kind of layers in an organization. You have a supervisor, and then you've got the employees beneath them, and that's kind of what's going to happen here. We're going to give the information to what we're going to call a supervisor agent. And it's not going to be in charge of writing these posts or press releases. Instead, it's going to delegate tasks to other agents. So there's going to be an agent that's in charge of writing press releases and another in charge of writing social media posts. So depending on the format we want, we give the information to the supervisor, it delegates its tasks to these other agents, who then write the actual posts and then send them back to this agent. So a really good question that I got was, well, when do we want to do something like this versus just have one agent? And this actually is a really important question and very relevant right now in this moment in time. With something like Claude Code, where you have these things called skills, you can essentially load in different instructions to your agent depending on the task it's doing. And that's kind of a similar idea here. Imagine that we had like 20 very complicated tasks for one agent. A big limitation is how well we can explain it, and that's going to result in a very long system message, which results in a higher cost, right? So one way we could do this is maybe some of those tasks are less common than others. And so instead of giving it in the system message for every single time, we have our agent decide whether or not to delegate to a different agent that has these specific instructions. And that way we're not accumulating the cost over and over again. And so it's very similar. It's like we have like our system message kind of spread out among different agents depending on their tasks. I mean, kind of like if you think about it as humans, the more specific tasks that we are asked to do, we can start to get confused about like what exactly we want to do. That being said, like this is a very simple example, so we could just have one agent do this, but I think that's important to note as we go forward. So in this structure, we get a nice first draft of our press release or social media post, but we don't want to just like post the first draft. Like there's no human review at this point. So that's what we're going to implement. We're going to have it sent to a human, so in our case, us, and we get to see what the AI has written. And we can decide, well, is this good, or are there any edits that are needed? So we'll either approve it, or we'll say, no, we don't approve it, and we'll add some edits. It'll go back to the AI agent, which will then incorporate these edits, and then it'll come back to us, and we'll kind of go in a loop. This is the human in the loop element, until we finally approve. And then finally, just to kind of showcase how powerful this is, and like the power of AI, I want this to be bilingual. And so we're going to have this all in English for the first bit, and then at the end we'll just have a different agent translate this to Spanish, and then send this off via email to us, just so we have the draft ready for us to post. So with all this in mind, let's head over to N8N and the Recitation website, and let's get started. I'm now over on the Recitation website, and we are going to build a couple different workflows. Before, in the previous recitations, we have built just one workflow, but now that we have this idea of sub-workflows, we're actually going to have three. We're going to have our press release agent, our social media agent, and then our main workflow, which calls those other ones to make these posts for us. So on the web page, if you scroll down, I am going to, there are very explicit instructions on if you want to go through step by step and build each thing, how to do so. But we're also going to copy and paste in sections just so we can talk about them in a little bit more depth. We're going to start here where it says press release agent, and you'll see this that says show code 159 lines. So I'm going to click it, and I'm going to copy code. And then we're going to go over to N8N, and we're going to make a new workflow. So I just gave myself a folder just so I can keep things organized. I'll hit create workflow, and then I'm going to paste this in. For me, Command V, it might be Control V for you, and we'll see something like this. So I'm just going to quickly rename this as the press release agent. This will just make it easier for us to find what we are looking for when we need to reference this later on. And you'll recognize some of these nodes and maybe not all of them, so let's quickly talk through. So first of all, we've got the model, which we know I'm just clicking into it to add in my credential. And we've got an AI agent. Let's click in and see what this AI agent is doing. Okay, so in terms of this user message, it says text, and then it's got this thing that's like a JSON.text and title, JSON.title. Currently, that's not specified as anything. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But if we take a look at the system message, it's actually fairly short. We could make this a little bit longer if we want to have it have like a specific brand voice. Because right now it just says like act as the in-house marketing and communication specialist for Evanston Pathways. And then I give a little bit more information about what this company is, what it does. And then I say using the content provided, your role is to create English language press releases following Associated Press format that are both accessible and engaging. These should be professional and ready to send to news outlets. So then at the very end, remember, if you remember Markdown, the 2 asterisks, 1 on either side, means bold. I say do not write in Spanish. This will later be translated. This was mostly because when I was using this with older models, since I said that this was like a bilingual company, it might have written in both English and Spanish. And what we are going to do is say, we're going to start in English, and then later on we'll translate the relevant things that we need to. But we don't need to right now, so let's not worry about it. Remember, this doesn't really give us a whole lot about tone, about specific language. Maybe there are certain things that we wanted to say, other things we don't want it to say. We can really customize how it writes these press releases just by adding this. Then we have something called an output parser. So remember, in the AI agent, I turned on require specific output format, which means that we want our AI agent to have its output have a very specific JSON format. And we're going to see what that looks like in a little bit, but if we click into the structured output parser, it says required, so it's going to have something called a press release title and a press release body. When you've got a press release, you need to have a title and you just need to have the content as well. And so that's what we are saying it will look like here. And then finally, we've got this edit fields node that we introduced last week. And if I click into it, I take this thing that we were saying is this press release body, so the main content, and I'm literally just adding on like a sentence at the end, which is just a little blurb for the company. Generally for a press release, you want to have some information on like the contact and who is like providing this information. So I just give something about like what Evanston Pathways is and what it does. But an important note here is that we could have just like told our AI agent, you have to end with this sentence. And if it's a smart enough model, it should be able to do it. But I just kind of wanted to demonstrate this just so you see it again. And I also say include other input fields. So remember, we have this press release title that it will also have. So that's really what's going on in this part of our workflow. And then we've got this thing that says when executed by another workflow. We're introducing a couple more triggers today, and then we'll have seen almost all of the main ones. But this one is saying, okay, like another workflow can call this, and that's what will start this workflow running. And if I click in, we see input data mode. So that's saying like, how will the data that this workflow is receiving look? We could say accept all data, define using a JSON example, but we're going to say define using the fields below, and we're going to say that this workflow, when it's called, it needs to have 2 elements. It needs to have something called text, something called title. And that's actually what we saw was passed to the AI agent. And we'll see a little bit later on how we are going to input that when we call this workflow. So very last thing for this workflow, we actually have to hit publish. So this is kind of new in NAN, but we're going to hit publish and you add a version name and I hit publish. And this is what lets our other workflow call this one. So we have done workflow 1 of 3, and we're going to repeat this process except for the social media agent. So I'm going to start a new workflow. And back in the Recitation 3 website document, I'm going to scroll down to social media agent, and I will copy over this code. And doing so, you should see something like this. It's pretty much the same as the previous one, except we don't have an edit fields node. I'm going to connect my credential. And when we click into the when executed by another workflow node, we'll see instead of having a title, we just have the text. That's because for a social media post, we generally don't need to have a title. Like if you look at Instagram, there's not going to be a title to a post. And similarly, if we click into the AI agent, we'll see that the system message has something very similar to the press release agent, but it's a little different. I'm saying these posts are primarily Facebook and Instagram. We could specify it to be a different format. I say write a single post that is common for both, and do not create separate posts for multiple platforms. When I was like testing out building this agent, when I said just like write social media posts, it would like write a different type of post for each different platform. And while that can be useful, I found it better just to right now, we're going to specify one, and then we could, if we want to, say, hey, like we want it to be in these different formats. And that's actually where an output parser would be really great, because we could say, Twitter post, and then we could have like Facebook post, Instagram post, and we could specify for each one what we want the text to look like. Okay, so I'm going to rename this to my social media agent, just so I know what it is. And then we're going to publish it, just so we can see it later. Okay, so we have 2 of our 3 workflows all set up, and we are going to now go to our main one, which is going to call these as tools. I'm now over in a new workflow in N8N. This is going to be our main workflow that we are going to build. And we are going to start with something that looks like a Google form, but it's native to N8N. And as we do, I really want to show you the progress that we've made, and it's only week 3, and this is only like the 3rd hour of recitations, so you really are learning a lot of how this works. So if I click Add First Step, we can see trigger manually, just click a button, it starts the workflow. We've seen that. On app event, of course there's like thousands of these, but we have seen a couple of them, so we kind of see how they work. We could start it like when we receive an email, for example. I'll talk about on a schedule a little bit later, but that's just like the workflow starts every day, every hour, something like that. We'll talk about on webhook call in Recitation 5. This is what we're going to do today is on form submission. We just saw when executed by another workflow. We've used on chat message, and next week we'll talk about when running evaluation. So you're really getting to see all of these different types of triggers and how they work in N8N. But we'll use on form submission. And when we open this, it'll look like like a Google form. But I just want to give you a brief example of what this looks like. So I'll say form title, let's say communications posts. And I'll say this is a form description, just so we can see what this will look like. And right now, if I hit execute step, you should see a pop-up like this. And so it's a form, it says communications post, this is a form description. We don't actually have any elements, so we just have a submit button. And you can see that it's like listening for a test form submission. I'm just gonna close it for now, but we need to now add some questions to this form. And that's what's called a form element. And we're going to start with 4 different ones, and then we'll kind of go on from there. So what information do we need to have when someone wants to submit an idea for a post? Well, there's a couple different things we need. One, we just need the base information about the event or like the post. So let's say, I'm going to call it content for now. So what is the information? So the label is going to be like what the question displays as. What is the information needed for the post/press release? You see we can add like the element type, so this could be text, which is what we're going to do, but we're going to use some of these other ones. Otherwise, you could have someone submit files, other things, passwords, placeholders, just like what's displayed, a default value if someone doesn't anything, and we're going to make this a required field. We can't really make a post without the information. What else do we need? For a press release, we mentioned that we need a title. So we're going to say, I'm going to call this title. What's the title of the press release? You can kind of fill in whatever you want here. I recommend following along and putting the same field names, and that'll be the JSON key that we use. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And we're not going to have this be required, because imagine it's just a social media post. We don't need a title. Okay, and kind of related, we need to know what format this is going to be in. So I'm going to write format here. How is this posted? is kind of like what we want to say. And then for the element type, let's just make this like a drop down where you can select, or not a drop down, but like check boxes where you can choose stuff. So I'm going to choose check boxes. And then for the checkbox label, I'll say social media post as one option, and I'll do press release as another. So we'll see what this looks like. And then we could limit the selection. It says unlimited. You can choose as many as you want, as few as you want. In this case, I'm going to say a range because we don't want them to not be able to select any. That's less useful. We'll say that you have to select at least one and a maximum of 2 of these. And we'll make it required. If we don't know the format, we can't really do much. And then finally, this is like really all we need, but maybe we say we want to know who submitted this so that we can follow up if there's any questions, assuming that the team is like very familiar with each other. We could just say like name and say, you see it says, what is your name? So we'll do something like that. And we can make it required or not. I'm going to leave it unrequired for now. But, you know, if you have some questions, maybe they don't submit all the information, the post isn't that great, so you get this final draft, but you're like, I'm not exactly sure about this. Let's follow up and figure out what's going on before we submit. So now let's hit execute step. And we can see a lot more information here. What does the information need for the post/press release? What's the title? How is this posted? And what is your name? And we can see that there's stars for the required things. So maybe I'll say, let's say conversation roundtable is what I'm going to call this. So maybe you have, since we're saying this is like a bilingual education thing, maybe you have a table where people can speak in English, Spanish, kind of practice languages, and we'll say there will be a, you see, I've already done this, so I'm going to just put this in. I'm saying there will be a conversation table at Robert Crown tonight from 8 to 9 p.m. You could really say whatever you want. This is mostly to test and see what it is. And we can say, how is this posted? I'm just going to say, maybe we put both for now. We're going to post it in a local newspaper or something like that. And when I hit submit, we'll see that this stops listening. I'm going to close this for now. And we can actually see our output is in a nice JSON format, which really just matches each question. So we can see that our field names become the keys for the JSON. And then what we submitted became the values. Content, there will be conversation table, title, conversation round table, and then format, we can see it shows us the 2 formats. It's an array. So with all of that information now, we need to pass it to an AI agent so it has all of this information and then can start to control what we want. So let's do that now. So I'm going to just save this workflow so I have it available. I'm going to hit this plus and I'm going to add an AI agent. So this is a very important clarification. Just because I added an AI agent doesn't mean it has the information from the previous node available. We need to make sure we give it that information so it can do a good job. Source for prompt, it says connected chat trigger node, but we don't have a chat trigger. So currently this says it's undefined, and we're actually going to choose define below. And for the prompt, you can kind of do what you want here. So just as a reminder, in the Recitation 3 webpage, if I scroll down, this whole first part, you can copy this over, but it also has all of the steps here. And this is actually what we are going to put in, but I'm going to put it in manually in any end just so you can follow along. We want to give it all the information it needs. So we're going to say, here's what the content is. We'll say the content is this. You can see it starts to preview it. We'll say the title, and then I'm just like dragging and dropping from our input. And the reason why I put it in the website is maybe you didn't quite get this form to execute correctly right away. That's all right. So you can just like copy and paste this in and then start to have it match up. Then I'll say format. But just a reminder, if you do that and copy and paste from this Recitation 3 document, you see how we've got like content, title, format here as our JSON keys. If you don't make them those in your any-then form, they're not going to match up and it's not going to pull the information correctly. But we can see here how it is previewing content, title. So this is literally what our AI agent is going to receive, which is great. And remember, I chose this as expression, not fixed. So it can read this as content coming from our previous nodes. So now our AI agent has the information about the event, but it doesn't have any instructions on what it's supposed to do with it. So we need to add our system message. So under options, click add option system message. And I'm going to provide you with a system message that you can play around with, but in the Recitation 3 website, it's right here. It's under system message. And I'm going to copy it in. And while you're doing that, I'll just read out a little bit what it is. So I give it a little bit of context, the same context as before, but I'll be honest, that might not actually be necessary for what this is going to be doing, because this is going to be our supervisor that is then going to tell other agents what to do. More importantly, I say, using the content provided, your role is to use your tools to create English language social media posts and or press releases based on the formats. So remember, it's got the formats here. I might even just do this, formats, because it might be multiple, that are both accessible and engaging. And then I tell it a little bit of just a couple of rules. So like when the format includes social media, use the social media tool. Similarly, use the press release tool to write press releases. And then I say, do not write these post/press releases yourself. Always use the tools to do so. Because I had given it this context before, there's the possibility that it would just try and write these posts itself. And we want to say, no, that's not your role. Your role is really to delegate tasks. And we have to be very specific about this. And one thing that's nice about NAN is we can actually see when it uses its tools. So if it didn't, we would know. And we could then change the system message to be a little bit better. So a couple last steps. We, of course, need to add a chat model. So I'm going to choose OpenAI. I'm going to choose like the newest model, GPT 5.2, but I'm actually going to make the reasoning low. So just so you know how to do this, I would click add option, and there's a lot of options here. I'm going to choose reasoning effort, change it to low, and so that means that it's going to use fewer tokens, and it's also going to be a little bit faster as a result. And we're going to just add memory. So I'm just going to add simple memory. And this is because we're using multiple tools. So it kind of needs to remember what it's been doing so it doesn't kind of forget what it's done. And we don't have a connected chat trigger node, so we have to hit define below for session ID. And for the key, there's many things you can do. We need to have it remember like what it's been doing. In this case, what I have done is I've used the submitted at. And I'm saying, okay, like likely we're not going to have two people submit the form at the exact same time. And as a result, if we use that, that's just going to be like one conversation, one person, and we'll be all set. But there's many different things you can do. That's not like a hard and fast rule. You really just want to make sure that things are not colliding, conversations or runs of the workflow. So we're almost there. There's a couple more things for us to do. So really the only thing we need to do now to have it write these posts is to have it have tools to do so. And then later on, we'll see that we want to have the format be nice so then we can iterate on it. So let's just start with the tools. So I'll click on tool, and we're gonna use this thing that says call NAN workflow tool. So that's how we call a different workflow. So let's do one of them. And let's say this is going to be the press release. Let's say press release tool. Before, we had like a default description for like the Google Calendar tools or Google Sheets. But since we're calling a workflow, our agent really doesn't know what the workflow is doing. So we really have to be specific about what this is doing. Since it's not a very complicated workflow that we're calling, we don't need to say that much. But imagine it was like a workflow with many steps. We probably want to say, you want to call it, in this case, this is exactly what's going on. And so we're just going to, for now, say, call this to write press releases. This just gives it a sense of what this is. The title also gives it away because we said in the system message previously what's happening. For source, we're actually able to just like write JSON for a workflow and give it to it, but we're going to use database, which is just saying, you look at the workflows that we have written and that we have available in NAN. And when I pull this drop down, I'll see that I've got like my press release agent. And if I hadn't published, it would like have like a yellow triangle and says, this is not published, publish it to be able to reference it. But so these are all workflows that I have that have this trigger of like when executed by another workflow. So I'll just choose press release. And when I do, we'll see that we have these inputs that we said before. And we're just going to let our agent decide what to put as the text and as the title. And keep in mind that if like these names were not very specific, maybe in the description we say, oh, for text, you want to input like the content of the post. And for the title, you should put the title. But because I think they're fairly self-explanatory for now, if we can understand what it is, the AI probably can too. But just as a general rule, if we had like a different input that was just a little less clear, maybe we want to specify what it wants to put here. And that's essentially all we need to do to have it use this tool. And we're going to do exactly the same thing for social media. So I'll press plus, call innate and workflow tool. I'll call this social media tool. I'll also use this to write social media posts. And then I'm going to look for my workflow, click it, and then I've just got the text, which I'll let the AI decide what to do. So now let's take a second to run this and see what exactly happens. So remember, before I chose as my formats press release and social media post, so we should see it call both tools. I'm going to save it as it runs. And so we can see that it's first going to the LLM with the system message saying, like, what do we need to do? And then it's like, okay, you've got these tools, you need to call them. We see it called the press release tool and the social media tool, and now it's just winding down. So if I click on the press release tool, we will see a press release title and a press release body. So that was kind of like how we had the output parser, which is great. So it gives us like the title, the body, which is awesome. There's a question on the homework that asks you for the output of either the press release tool or the social media tool. This is kind of the type of thing that I want you to screenshot. And then social media tool, if we look, it's going to be very similar. So then finally, if we go to the AI agent, well here, look, we've got like this output, but its output is really nasty. Look, it says calling social media tool with input, and then it's got like some JSON, and it's just really nasty. This is literally just like a big block of text. Well, it's also kind of missing like the, so it says, yeah, calling social media tool. It doesn't say anything about the press release tool. So this is actually very important for like why we would want like an output parser. We could also say in the system message, hey, we want it to look like this. But right now we only have one key, output. And we're going to say we want to have multiple keys. We're going to add an output parser just for this reason. It'll make it very easy for us to reference things further along the line. So I'll click require specific output format. And now we've got this new thing that says output parser. We can see it here as well if I move these out of the way. So I'm going to click on that. And we choose a structured output parser. It says return data in a defined JSON format. So a couple people were getting messed up by the schema type. If we have generate from JSON example, this is saying, okay, like we have this key state, this key cities. This is kind of like what it should look like. But if we kind of match it like that, we have a little bit less control. We're going to use a schema that I made, which is on the website, which is right here. And we'll just kind of read it quickly and see what it says. So I'll go to generate, define using JSON schema. And I'll copy and paste this in. And it's a little bit hard to read, but the properties, it says social media body. It's gonna be one paragraph social media post, maybe empty, press release title, short headline, maybe empty, and a press release body text, headline not duplicated, maybe empty. So let's actually run this again and see what it looks like. So it'll take a second, and then I will be back once it has run. So it finished running, it didn't take that much longer, and let's take a look now. We can see it called the structured output parser. Let's see what the output looks like. If I click on the AI agent, now for the output, instead of being like one big block of text that was actually missing information, it split it out into the social media body, press release title, press release body. It's not missing anything. We can see exactly what the social media post looks like versus the press release post. It's just so much easier for us to read. And then as we go on and want to make more edits, it's going to be easy for us to like call each one of these. Remember, we'll be able to like drag and drop like from the input when we call the next one. So with that in mind, I'm going to put a couple of questions on screen for you to try out. Now that we have finished the first part of our agent, take a second to try out these questions, pause here, then we'll talk about them some before moving on to our human in the loop part of the workflow. Now that you've taken a second to try out these questions, let's talk through them before moving on to the next part. So first of all, add a question to the N8N form that accepts the user's email. Let's just quickly go over to N8N and see what that looks like. So if I were in this form, I could add a form element, and then remember, for element type, we can actually accept just emails, which is pretty great. Then we have a question about trying to change the social media agent to never use hashtags. So remember, we can just change the system message and really enforce that we do not want any hashtags here. If it continues to do so, we could later on in actually this next step, we can kind of reinforce it with our editor. And then finally, the last question asks about making a specific Twitter/X tool. And so remember, there's a very specific character limit for tweets. I think it's 280 characters. So we'd want to enforce that. But remember, that's actually very tricky because it's going to read as tokens, not as characters. And so we have to be a little bit more careful there. If you manage to get that working and it seems to be good, let me know. I'll be super happy to see what that looks like. So for the next bit, we're actually going to copy and paste in a big chunk of nodes, and then we'll talk through each of them just so we can see them all together, and then you can try them out yourself a little bit later. On the Recitation 3 webpage, we're going to scroll down to Building the Comms Agent Part 2 Human in the Loop Edits. And it says show code 253 lines. If you want to go through and build it yourself, I do provide instructions on how to do that. But we're just going to copy it in and then talk through every single thing. So when I take this and I paste in here, you'll see that there's a lot going on, and we will figure out what is happening. So I'm going to click in here to add my credential, and I'm just going to save. And so now we've got our AI agent, and we're saying, okay, we've got a good first draft, but we want to see if it is good or it suggests edits. So we are going to attach the output of the AI agent, to input 1 here. And we can see that this actually forms a loop where we see merge, wait, approved. So we'll talk through every single thing that's going on here. But essentially, the main idea is we're going to get information. We're then going to see it. We're going to approve it or not. If we don't, it goes to this editor agent, which is just an AI agent. It goes back around, and we repeat that process until we finally approve it. And this structure is very general, and if you want to actually just take these nodes and use them for your project, feel free to. It's a great way to incorporate human feedback into an AI system. And so merge just takes input from 2 different sources. And what that can mean is if you have 2 sources of data going in, it can kind of combine them in some way. There's actually a lot of different ways. So I've got currently on append, but it can combine the data. It can choose a branch. In our case, we're either going to get data from the AI agent, or it's going to loop back around and it'll choose the data from that one. So it's just a good way to incorporate this loop. Just kind of a nice little trick. And then we've got this thing called a wait node. So wait has a bunch of different ways to use it. So we can resume after a certain time interval at a specific time. We'll talk about webhooks later on. But then we can also say on form submitted. So this is actually just a way of adding another N8N form into the middle of our workflow. And it's saying you have to wait for the workflow for someone to submit this form, and then it resumes the workflow. And this is what's called human in the loop. There's a lot of different ways to do this. If you click the plus for nodes, and then human in the loop. It doesn't have the wait node there, but there's a lot of different ways you could do it. You could do it via Telegram, email, Discord, many different options. We're just going to stick with N8N for now, but feel free to explore them on your own. So we can see we have a form title like before, form description, which I actually just added the press release title, press release body, and social media body. So that's just so we can see what the posts look like. And then I added form elements like before. And so I'm like, okay, I've got one that says approved. Do we approve of the posts? And then edits, which I didn't put as required field. But I'm saying here are the edits that need to be made if we don't approve it. And that's all that's going on with that node. And then we've got an if node that we saw last week. And this is saying, hey, did we say that it's approved in this wait node? And if so, then we continue on. And otherwise, we need to go to this editor. So here, let me run these nodes one by one just to see what happens. So if I do merge, it just kind of passes this data through. And then if I click wait, it'll pop up with a form where we can actually see the press release title, the press release body, like so all of this information. So we can actually see that it added some of this information. And okay, so we can see that maybe it didn't do exactly what we want. Look, it tried to add an email, a phone number, a website. It added something about Evanston Pathways, but then remember at the end we added this edit fields node where we added this thing founded in 2022, so it's a little bit repetitive. Maybe we need to change that. And one thing we can do to change that is we can just like add the edits here, but then also it's important that maybe we need to change something earlier in our workflow too. So that's something to note, that like, we have different ways to edit things. And so I'm going to say no, and I'm going to say for the press release body, remove the email, phone number, and website. Also remove the section about Evanston Pathways, since we have it twice and it's sort of repetitive. So let's hope, we'll see if it like gets rid of it altogether or not. Maybe I had to be a little bit more specific, but I think this will be a great way for us to do this. So I'll hit submit, and then it says the form is submitted, and we can see that it executed. If I look at the wait, we can see approved, it says no, and the edits that I have. And in this if node, now we can see if JSON approved, so that's coming from this field, is equal to yes, then we'll go one way, otherwise not. So if I hit execute step, we can see it goes to the false branch, and if we exit out, we can see that there's actually like, it chose this branch, it became green. Now onto the editor. If I click into it, we, just like before, we gave it the title, a press release body, social media body, so we gave it all of that information. But then I also added something that says edit. So we can see it's got all of this information. I say some of the edits that we need to add. I have a specific output parser. You can take a look at that yourself. But it's I think it's just actually the same as before. And so I give it information about the company. So it's important now to give it information about the company because it is going to actually be rewriting. It needs to know about this. And I say you'll be given messages as well as edits that are wanted. Use this. Your role is to edit the messages given to reflect these changes and return them to the user. And then I give it a little bit of context as like, these are press releases and social media posts, etc. Now, here, I'm actually going to change the reasoning effort here to low, just to make it a little bit faster for us. But actually, no, I'm going to keep it on medium. And the reason why is perhaps the first time around we want a quick first draft. But then if we need edits, maybe it needs to be a little bit smarter so that it can actually add the edits itself. And so it'll take a second, and then we will see what the output looks like. Hopefully it will look a little bit better for us. And if I take a look, so let's see, it's a little bit hard to see. So this press release body, let's actually like keep looping around so we can see it in the form. So then I'll click on merge again. And let's see. Okay, so it's being a little bit weird because I am not just like running it fully. So let's actually take a second, run it fully, and then we'll see what exactly is happening now that we have seen this full loop. So I'm essentially going to run the same thing as we had before, but I'm just going to run the whole form. Just a quick note, while it starts to run, we can start to see it running in the background. The merge node, the reason why we're having an issue was because we were running nodes individually, and so it was seeing an input from the AI agent and from our editor, and so it was getting a little bit confused about which one to do. However, when we're running it this way, not going to be an issue. And just as a note, I only chose social media body this time, and so we can see it doesn't have a press release title or body. And we've got something that looks like this for the social media body. I think it looks pretty good. I'm going to just say that remove the hashtags. Like maybe we don't want it. Maybe that's not the proper format for the specific browser that we want, or social media outlet. So I'm going to hit submit. We can see it's running. Sorry, I'm trying to keep this open so it runs, and we can see it went to the editor and it came back around. And now we can see it actually removed it. And so we can actually say approved. If I hit submit, It says yes, and then we can actually see now it took the true branch. So that's kind of like how you'd see it. And for the homework, I say that like I want you to hit no for approved essentially so we can see that this full loop ran. So now I'm going to give you a couple more questions so you can try this out on your own. We've seen this idea of human in the loop in action in N, and now here are a couple questions. Feel free to pause here, try out some of these, and then we will come right back. Now that you've taken a second to try this out, let's talk through a couple of these at like a high level to understand what exactly is going on. So what happens if the reviewer rejects the post but does not provide any edits? Well, if we think about the workflow in N, it'll go to the editor and it won't have any edits. And so maybe it decides to like review it and change some things, but it's not going to know exactly why we didn't approve it. And so that's kind of like a complicated case where maybe we need to update the system message to say something like, hey, if there are no edits, like review it, try and rewrite it, think critically about like why this might not have been a good post, but it's just like not necessarily exactly what we want. So we need to keep that in mind, that part of the reason why we have human in the loop is literally just to have the human provide edits and then the AI to implement them. Then I mentioned before that there's a lot of different human in the loop options if we're looking at question 2, so feel free to try this out yourself. And then I also mentioned that if we were just to be in this human in the loop many times, maybe the tone of the message is going to stray away from our original attempt. That's because all of the information from the original N8N form is not actually being passed to the editor. Remember, it goes to our AI agent, which makes this first draft, but only that first draft is passed to this editor. And you know, as we keep going, we could see that it kind of like implemented some new information, right? It added some information to kind of flesh out these ideas. But if we didn't give it that information in the first place, it could be making stuff up to kind of like fill it out. So we have to be very careful there that it's keeping the tone. And that's part of the reason why the human is an important part of this loop. And finally, we've got this idea of like character limits. As I mentioned before, that is a little bit more tricky, but we can always just like have like a manual review at the end. So, and this fifth one, I'm not going to really review it, but I think it's a really great way to start to think about like how do you expand the workflow? How can you make this like a little bit better to like have these different functionalities? So with that in mind, let's hop into the last part of this workflow. I'm now back over at the Recitation website, and I scrolled down to this thing that says Part 3, Translation and Sending. We're almost there. We have a post that we approved, and finally we're going to say, well, we need to possibly translate it. And I'm going to copy over this code. And while I'm doing it, I'm going to just tell you about a small rule that we decided, or should I say that I decided, but it's not necessarily like a true one. In this case, and so I'll actually pull from approved here to need Spanish translation. What I have decided is that, just as a simplifying assumption, let's say all social media posts for this company are going to be bilingual, but then press releases, maybe we're only interacting really with some English newspaper outlets. As a result, press releases we're not going to translate, and so that's just going to be the rule. Social media posts need translation, press releases don't. And so if I click on this need Spanish translation node, I'm going all the way back to this first node, so on form submission, and I look at the format, and I say if it contains, so remember, if I actually go back here to the on form submission, we can see that this is an array because of those just regular square brackets. And so I'm saying if it contains the phrase social media post, that means that we have a social media post and we need to have translation. Feel free to explore this a little bit your own, but then it just goes to a translator. I give it very specific information. I say like text, here is the social media body that we're going to have. And I say act as a professional English Spanish translator. And then I say use like a specific type of Spanish. Like so you can really specify the language. It's very good at translating turns of phrase, things like that. And then I send a message. I have it set up to send it just to my email. feel free to change that. But also if you send it to my email, that's no problem as well. This is just kind of an email for this class, so I don't mind. And yeah, so that's like the entire workflow. So when it asks you to run the entire workflow, I want you to screenshot like this whole thing. I even want to see like the translator part as well. But with that in mind, let's just look at a few last questions, and then we'll move on to the exploratory content. Take a second to try out some of these questions and think a little bit more. These are just kind of like broad ideas of how can we make this workflow even better. It's pretty powerful in its own right, but different organizations need different things. So right now I'm just having the final draft be sent to me, but maybe it needs to be sent to the person submitting the idea or like a different person. So take a second, try out these questions, and pause here, and then we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back for the last time. Let's just quickly talk about these few questions. So if we want to send the final draft of the same email address to the same email address as the person submitting the idea, remember before we talked about we can change the N8N form to collect someone's email, and then we can actually just pull that using N8N to this final node with the email to like have it be sent there instead. Right now it's just set up to send to a very specific email address every single time. Perhaps that's not what we want. The second question I think is a little bit more interesting. So we say, let's say you send press releases to an English language and Spanish language newspaper. So some press releases need to be translated. What would we change? So heading back over to N8N very quickly, right now our formats are just press release or social media post. But we could change that. We could say press release Spanish, press release English. We could even specify networks and say like this newspaper. And then once we have that, once we get to need Spanish translation, we could add some more conditions. Say like it's a social media post, or it's this, and that would let us decide a little bit more how we want to translate things. And then finally, we would have to change a little bit the format of the email. I encourage you to take a look at that. And then last, so our decision about whether or not Spanish translation is needed could be done by the AI agent. So this is actually a very important note. So right now, what we are saying is we've got like a decision rule using this node, which decides whether or not we need to do this. But instead what we could do is just have this translator agent with a tool that's sending a message, and we could just give it very specific instructions and say, we could say like, here are the formats required for this like post or something. And here are some rules about like when you should have it be in Spanish or not. That's a really good way for us to use the power of an agent. This was just like a different way to do it. So I think that's a really good way to make sure that you understand exactly what's going on with that. So just as a quick reminder, here are just the things from this recitation for the homework. And then we are going to quickly move on to exploratory content just to see a couple fun things at the end of this recitation. In class, you already saw Professor Martin's personal assistant, which was very powerful and you can use to like access a bunch of different tools. And I'm going to show you something perhaps a little less powerful, but something you can actually build in N8N and that I built myself a while ago, which has been pretty useful. So it's under the section called exploratory content, and you can actually just copy and paste this whole thing, but I'll show you what I built in N8N quickly. It is my personal agent that is going to perhaps look kind of a lot, so let's just kind of talk through what's going on. But I really made a lot of use of this idea of hierarchical agents because I wanted this to be able to do a lot of different things. And so just having one agent, especially when I built this in the like slightly older models, it would get really confused with like all of the different tasks it needs to do. So I've got an assistant agent, but really that's just in charge of routing to these other ones. We've got Google Calendar, Google Contact, Gmail, Outlook Calendar, Outlook Contact, Outlook Email, and then Hacker News, which is a news source. So, and each of these tool calls are an agent that has its own tools. So if I were to just give all of those tools to this one agent, that'd be a lot of tools for it to sort between. And you know, there's like little small differences between Outlook and Google. Just as a quick note, Northwestern now isn't letting N8N connect to your like Northwestern Outlook. So unfortunately, this is no longer quite as functional, but it was really great for me when it did. And just to give you a couple highlights. I encourage you to explore this yourself. So switch is a node that is kind of like the if node, except it can go to like more than 2 routes. Right now I only have it set up to go to 2, but we could have it a rule where it could go to like 5 different routes. And so I have like a Telegram trigger, so I'm like sending messages to Telegram. And this is saying I can either send a text message and it'll go this route, or it will go and I can send actually a message using audio in Telegram. And then I use OpenAI to transcribe it. And so that's a different way, so I could just like send a quick voice message, which was really, really great. And then here, like, so currently I deactivated this part, but so I gave it like a personality. Oh, it wants me to recommend an 8N, which I think I'm already doing by making this video. And then we have this thing called Cartesia. So I actually had it set up so that it could send me voice messages back. I ended up opting for it to just send me text messages. I just prefer to read as opposed to listen. But Cartesia and 11 Labs are both ways that you can connect other sources and like have it go from text to speech and then receive voice messages back. I found Cartesia a little bit more easy to set up with N8N than 11 Labs. But the way I did is actually called an HTTP request node, which I'll show you a couple of them. But the idea is that you have some sort of like credential and you go to a URL. So this is also like how you do web scraping, except you change the method to get. But you can essentially connect N8N using the HTTP request node to any service that has what's called like a REST API. But that's essentially all of the nodes that are connecting to other services in N8N are an HTTP request node with just some like nice wrapping around it to make it a little bit more easy for you to use. So for example, like Google, Gmail, like all of those sorts of things are all just an HTTP request. So I'm also going to show you in a second what this Hacker News agent looks like. So let's take a look. It's essentially very similar to what we saw with like our press release agent. We've got when executed by another workflow. I've got an AI agent node, and I'm actually calling some HTTP requests as tools. And these are to like specific websites, but to like get the top stories or get news stories. So that's kind of like how you can use it. It's very useful to like be able to access a whole lot of different sources. And finally, perhaps the most useful thing that I set up for myself was this set of 4 nodes. So I promised that I would talk about the schedule trigger. And the idea behind this is that I set this up so that every day at 8 a.m., it would send a message to my Google Calendar agent, or it was my Outlook originally. And we can see I said, good morning, what events do I have in my calendar for today? And so what it would do is then it would send that to the Google Calendar or the Outlook Calendar agent. It would get my calendar and then it would send me a text message with my calendar for the day in like a nice format saying like, good morning, here you have 3 events for today, this from like 11 to 12 and so forth. So just really wanted to demonstrate this to you. It's available to you if you want to look at it yourself, play around with it a bit, get these services set up. But it's a very powerful way for you to kind of like have control over your calendar, over different services. Obviously, I could have added a lot more tools, and I plan to in the future. But with that, I'm going to end the recitation, and thank you for listening. Let me know if you have any questions, and see you next week.